Have you ever noticed that the more you try to silence your mind, the more noise it makes? The more you fight against your thoughts, the louder they scream. It's not a coincidence. And it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's because you're fighting against the only thing you've learned to use to survive, the constant noise that protects you from emptiness. In this video, you'll understand why your mind never stops, and how Ramana Maharshi discovered that silence is not conquest, it's surrender. Ramana Maharshi was 17 years old when he died. Not physically, but internally, he ceased to exist as a person. Alone in a silent room, he lay on the floor and simulated his own death. And at that moment, as he observed his still body, he asked the question that would change everything. If this body dies, who am I continuing to observe? This was not a mystical experience. It was a collapse of the ego. Ramana realized that everything he believed himself to be, his fears, his worries, his history, his identity, was just noise. And when the noise stopped, what remained was not emptiness. It was pure presence. But you don't need to fake your own death to understand this. You've already felt it. Every time you try to meditate and your mind starts shouting reminders, worries, judgments, it's doing exactly what it's been trained to do. Keep you busy. Because if you stop, if you really stop, you'll have to face what's underneath all that noise. The truth no one tells you is this: your mind isn't the problem. The problem is that you believe it is. From childhood, you learned that thinking meant solving problems, that anticipating was protecting yourself, that planning was controlling chaos. If you had critical parents, you learned to think compulsively to predict the next punishment. If you were rejected, you learned to mentally rehearse conversations so you would never make the same mistake again. If you were abandoned, you learned to create scenarios in your mind so you would never be caught off guard again. His mind became his armor, his warning system, his survival strategy. And now you want to silence her? She will fight, because in her unconscious understanding, silence means danger. It means unprotected. It means vulnerable. Ramana Maharshi understood this deeply. He said, "The mind does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be understood. Because the mind is not your enemy. It is merely a tool that you have mistaken for the operator." Think about it. When you're angry, you say, "I'm angry." But if you are the anger, who's noticing that you're angry? When you're anxious, you say, "I'm anxious." But if you are the anxiety, who's observing the anxiety happening? There is something within you that observes the mind, something that is always present, always silent, always witnessing, even when thoughts scream. And here's the truth that will hurt before it sets you free. You don't really want to silence your mind. You're afraid of what you'll find in silence. Because if your mind stops distracting you with the to-do lists, worries, judgments, and narratives, what's left? What's left is you, the real you, the one who was rejected, ignored, hurt, the one who learned they weren't enough, the one who built an entire personality just to be accepted. Mental noise isn't a bug, it's a resource. It protects you from feeling, from facing, from being. But Ramana Maharshi discovered something revolutionary. When you finally stop fighting the mind and simply observe, without judging, without trying to control, without trying to change, it dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because you stopped feeding it the belief that you are it. He called it self-inquiry. It's not meditation in the traditional sense. It's not emptying the mind. It's asking, who is thinking? Who is feeling? Who is trying to control? And when you truly ask this question, not as an intellectual concept, but as a living investigation, something changes. Because you realize the mind is an object that you observe. And you, the observer, never needed silence. You have always been silence. So stop trying to silence your mind as if it were your enemy. It's only doing the job you taught it to do, protecting you from the truth of who you are. The silence that Ramana Maharshi found did not come from breathing techniques or mantras. It came from ceasing to pretend that he was the voice in his head, and from recognizing that he had always been the one listening to the voice. Your mind will continue to make noise, but you don't have to live there. You can be the space where the noise happens and realize that this space has never been disturbed, never been touched, never needed fixing. Take a deep breath. If you've made it this far, maybe you're ready to stop fighting against yourself. In the next chapter, we'll delve into Ramana's most powerful technique, the question, who am I? And why it dissolves the ego without needing to destroy it. Have you ever noticed that there's someone inside you who observes your thoughts? Someone who notices when you're anxious, irritated, lost in thought? Who is this someone? Ramana Maharshi discovered that the answer to this question isn't a word. It's an awakening. And when you truly ask, who am I? Not as a philosophy, but as a living inquiry, the ego begins to dissolve. Because it never had a real answer. Ramana Maharshi's most powerful technique was not guided meditation. It wasn't visualization. It wasn't a mantra. It was a single question, repeated until all masks fell away. Who am I? But not in the way you're used to answering. Not with your name, your profession, your social roles. He wanted you to investigate the background of the person asking the question. Imagine this. You're worried about the future. Your mind keeps creating bad scenarios. So you ask, who's worried? Your mind answers, I'm worried. And then you ask again, but who is this I that's worried? And something strange happens. For a second, the worry falters. Because when you try to find the I that's worried, it disappears. Not because you destroyed it, but because it was never solid. It was always just a thought that you believed to be you. What Ramana was doing was dismantling the illusion of the ego without violence. He didn't say, kill the ego. He said, investigate it, search for it, try to find it. Because when you really look, you find nothing. You think you have a solid self, a fixed identity, but that self changes all the time. In the morning, you're one person. In the afternoon, after a critique, you're another. At night, alone, you're yet another. So which one is the real one? The truth is that none of them are. They are all personas. Masks you wear depending on the context, and beneath all those masks, there is no fixed face. There is pure consciousness, formless presence. But you're afraid of that. Because if you're not someone, who will protect you? Who will defend you? Who will guarantee that you won't be rejected, abandoned, forgotten? And that's why the ego fights so hard to survive. It's not evil. It's just scared. It was built when you were a child and realized you needed to be someone to be loved, to be accepted, to have value. So you created a you, a character, a story about who you are. And that story became so real that you forgot that you were the one who wrote it. Ramana said, the ego is like a line drawn on water. You can try to see it, but the more you look, the more it disappears. Here's what will change everything. You were never the ego. You are the one who perceives the ego. When you say, I am anxious, someone is observing the anxiety. When you say, I am insecure, someone is perceiving the insecurity. This someone, the observer, is never anxious, never insecure. They merely witness. Ramana's technique isn't complicated, but it's brutally honest. Every time a thought, emotion, or sensation arises, you ask, for whom is this arising? And the answer will always be, for me. Then you ask, who is this me? And you go back to the source. You're not looking for an intellectual answer. You're following the feeling of self to the point where it disappears. Like following a river to its source and discovering that the source is the ocean. But here's what nobody tells you. When you actually do this, your ego panics because it realizes it's being exposed, and it will try to distract you, It will create urgencies. It will remind you of tasks. It will invoke painful memories. It will do anything to make you stop asking. Because the ego knows, if you discover who you really are, it loses control. And control is all it has. But you don't need to kill him. You just need to stop believing him. Stop feeding him your attention. Stop defending the story he tells about you. And when you do that, when you truly investigate, who am I, without seeking an answer, only seeking the origin of the question, something extraordinary happens. The false self dissolves. And what remains is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is being. It is what you always were before you learned to pretend to be something else. So the next time you find yourself lost in thoughts, anxiety, fear, don't try to control it. Don't try to silence it. Just ask, who is feeling this? And when the mind says me, ask again, who is this me? And don't accept ready-made answers. Don't accept concepts. Follow your feelings. Delve into the origin. Return to the source of the self until there is nothing left to find. Ramana Maharshi lived this investigation to the end, and what he discovered was not an answer. It was an awakening. It was the direct realization that he was never the person he thought he was. He was always the consciousness observing the person. Take a deep breath. If you really try this, not as a mental exercise but as honest investigation, you'll begin to realize the you defend so much never existed, and the real you never needed defending. In the next chapter, we will explore the second technique, the silent observer. How to witness your thoughts without becoming them, and why this is more powerful than trying to change them. Have you ever noticed that you can observe your own thoughts? That there's a part of you that's always watching, always present, even when your mind is in chaos? This part is never anxious, never afraid, never lost. Ramana Maharshi called this the observer, and he said that humanity's greatest illusion is believing you are the film, when in reality you've always been the screen. In this chapter, you will learn the technique that separates who you are from who you think you are. There's a common scenario you've probably experienced. You're lying in bed at night, trying to sleep, and your mind won't stop. It's replaying conversations, planning tomorrow, recalling past mistakes. And you say, my mind won't stop. But wait, if you're noticing that your mind won't stop, who is noticing? Ramana Maharshi taught a simple yet devastating technique for the ego. Witnessing, simply observing, not trying to change, not judging, not controlling, just watching, as if you were an audience watching a movie without entering the screen. Because here's the secret. Thoughts aren't the problem. The problem is that you believe they are. When the thought, I am a failure, arises, you don't see it as a passing thought. You believe it's a truth about who you are. When the thought, nobody loves me, arises, you don't acknowledge it. You wear it as your identity. And that's where the suffering begins. Not because the thought exists, but because you've merged with it. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Ramana said something similar, but more directly. You are not trapped by your thoughts. You are trapped by the belief that you are them. The observer technique is simple, but it requires courage. Every time a thought arises, especially thoughts that hurt you, that judge you, that sabotage you, you don't try to expel it. You don't fight it. You simply acknowledge, this is a thought, and you observe it as you would observe a cloud passing in the sky. It's not indifference. It's disidentification. Because when you were a child and someone told you, you're stupid, you're too good, you're worthless, you weren't aware of it as an opinion. You absorbed it as truth. And that truth became a recurring thought. And that thought became the voice in your head, and that voice became you. But she was never you. She was just something you heard and believed. And now, as an adult, you still hear that voice. It criticizes. It doubts. It sabotages you. And you think it's your mind attacking you. But it's not. It's just a recording playing. An old tape that no one ever turned off. Ramana said, "The mind feeds on its identification. When you stop merging with thoughts, they lose power. Not because you repress them, but because you stopped feeding them with the belief that they are you. And here is the truth that will set you free. Your thoughts are not your own. They are echoes. They are conditioning. They are learned reactions. They are fossilized defense mechanisms. The voice that judges you is not yours. It is the voice of the one who judged you first. When you witness your thoughts without identifying with them, something powerful happens. You create space. Between you and the thought. Between you and the emotion. Between you and the reaction. And in that space you realize, I am not that. I am the one who is seeing this. But the ego hates that space, because in that space, it has no power. It needs you to believe that the thought is urgent, is real, is you. It needs you to react, to defend yourself, to prove something. But the observer doesn't need to prove anything. He just watches. Imagine this. The thought, "I'm not good enough," arises. Instead of spiraling out of control, you simply observe, "Interesting, that thought appeared." And you notice that it has a texture, a vibration, a story. But it's not solid. It's like smoke. And the more you observe it without clinging to it, it dissolves. Not because you fought against it, but because you stopped giving it the only fuel it needs, your belief. Viktor Frankl, who survived concentration camps, discovered this in the most brutal way possible. He said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response." Ramana taught the same thing, but he showed that this space is not something you create. It has always been there. You just forgot to inhabit it. So today, right now, try this. When the next heavy thought arises, fear, guilt, anger, insecurity, don't try to change it. Don't try to be positive. Just observe, as if you were watching someone else think, not thinking yourself. And notice the miracle. While you observe the thought, you realize that there is something within you that has never been touched by it. A calm presence, silent, stable. This is the real you, the observer. The one who has always been here, watching life unfold, while you were too busy believing you were the main character in the story. Ramana Maharshi doesn't ask you to destroy your thoughts. He invites you to stop dwelling in them, to return home, to the observing consciousness, which has never been wounded, never been rejected, never been less. Take a deep breath. You are not the noise. You are the silence that listens to the noise. In the next chapter, we will delve into the third technique, surrender. Not as giving up, but as the end of the inner war. How to stop fighting against yourself and discover that peace has always been on the other side of the struggle. Have you ever realized that your entire life is a struggle? A struggle to control the future. A struggle to change the past. A struggle to be accepted. A struggle to be different from who you are. And in the midst of this constant war, have you ever stopped to ask, who is fighting whom? Ramana Maharshi discovered that the greatest human illusion is not the ego. It's the belief that you need to conquer it. In this chapter, you will learn the most counterintuitive technique of all, surrender, and why it is the only path to true freedom. The word surrender is frightening, because in your mind, surrender means weakness. It means giving up. It means letting life defeat you. But Ramana taught something else. Surrender is stopping pretending you're in control and recognizing that you never were. He told the story of a man who spent years trying to silence his mind with rigorous techniques. Meditation, breathing, mantras. And the more he tried to control it, the more his mind rebelled. Until one day, exhausted, he stopped. Not because he succeeded, but because he realized he was fighting a shadow, and in that moment of total surrender, not of defeat, but of recognition, his mind became still. Not because he had conquered it, but because he had stopped fueling the war. Think about your own life. How many times have you tried to fix something about yourself? Your anxiety, your fear, your sadness, your anger. And the more you try to eliminate these parts, the louder they scream. It's like trying to hold water with your hands closed. The tighter you squeeze, the more escapes. Ramana said something that seems simple, but is revolutionary. Resistance creates persistence. The more you fight against something, the more power you give it. Because the struggle confirms that it is real, that it is a threat, that it needs to be fought. But what if it wasn't necessary? What if the anxiety you're trying to push away just wants to be seen? What if the sadness you're trying to stifle just needs to be felt? What if the anger you're suppressing is just trying to tell you that a boundary has been crossed? You learned early on that negative emotions are enemies, that you need to be strong, positive, resilient. So you created an internal war, one side of you trying to control the other. And in this war, there are no winners, only exhaustion. The surrender that Ramana teaches is not about giving in to suffering. It's about stopping fighting against life as it is, stopping demanding that the present be different, stopping resisting what is already happening. Nisargadatta Maharaj, another Indian master, said, "Wisdom is knowing that I am nothing. Love is knowing that I am everything. Between the two, my life flows. Surrender is this, recognizing that you control nothing, but also that nothing needs to be controlled. But you're afraid of that. Because if you stop controlling, who will protect you? If you stop resisting, you will be destroyed. If you surrender, you will disappear." And Ramana replies, "Yes, you will disappear. The false you, the character, the constructed identity. But what you truly are, the consciousness behind all of that, can never disappear. It simply stops pretending to be something else. Here's the truth that will dissolve the struggle. You're not fighting the world, you're fighting yourself. And that's a war no one can win. Every time you try to be different from who you are, you create an inner enemy. Every time you judge your pain, your vulnerability, your imperfection, you are saying, "I shouldn't be like this." And with that, you validate the deepest and most painful belief of all: I am not enough as I am. Surrender is the moment you stop trying to be enough, not because you gave up, but because you realized you always were. That inadequacy was never real. It was just a thought you defended to exhaustion. Ramana taught a simple yet profound practice. When something painful arises, fear, rejection, failure, instead of trying to change it, you ask, "Can I be with this? Can I allow this to exist without fighting?" It's not about liking it. It's about stopping resisting. And something miraculous happens when you do this. The emotion doesn't destroy you. It passes. Like a wave. It rises, reaches its peak, and dissolves. But while you fight against it, you keep it alive, because the fight is fuel. Viktor Frankl discovered this in the concentration camps. He couldn't change external reality, but he realized he could stop fighting what he felt. He could choose not to add suffering to suffering. And in that surrender, not to the horror, but to the inability to change it, he found a freedom that no tormentor could take away. Ramana took this even further. He said, "Surrender not only to circumstances, surrender to life, to existence, to what is. and discover that you are never separate from it. So today, instead of fighting, try surrendering. Not as defeat, but as the end of the war. When anxiety comes, don't try to be brave. Just allow it to be there. Feel where it lives in your body. Breathe with it, and ask, what happens if I don't fight? When sadness comes, don't try to be strong. Just sit with it, like you're holding a child who needs to cry. You don't need to fix things. You just need to be present. Ramana lived this surrender to the very end. When his body was dying of cancer, someone asked if he was afraid. He smiled and said, "Where would I go?" Because he knew the body is something that consciousness inhabits, not something that it is. You don't need to control your life to live it. You don't need to conquer your ego to be free. You just need to stop fighting and realize that the peace you seek isn't on the other side of victory. It's on the other side of the struggle. Take a deep breath. Surrender. Not to the suffering, but to the illusion that you need to be something other than who you are. In the next chapter, we will delve into the final technique, silence as total presence. Because true silence is not the absence of noise. It is the fullness of being completely present in the I am. You've spent your whole life trying to fill the silence with noise, with distractions, with thoughts, with relationships, with work. Because deep down, you learned that silence is emptiness, and emptiness is dangerous. But Ramana Maharshi discovered the opposite. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is total presence. It is the most alive state that exists. And his last technique isn't about achieving silence. It's about realizing that you have always been silence. Ramana would spend hours, sometimes days, in absolute silence. Not as punishment, not as spiritual discipline, but because he recognized that silence is the language of being. It is where you find the pure I am, before adding any story, any role, any mask. He taught, you don't need to create silence. You need to stop avoiding it. Because think honestly, when was the last time you were in total silence? No music, no cell phone, no television, no internal conversation about the past or future. Just you, present, here. Most people can't stay like that for 5 minutes, because in silence, all the masks fall, all distractions cease, and you come face to face with who you really are. And that's terrifying, because you've spent your life building an identity, and in silence, that identity vanishes. And if it vanishes, who's left? This is the question Ramana wants you to confront. Not intellectually, but experientially, in living silence. Ramana's final technique is the simplest, and therefore the most difficult. He called it resting in the I am. It's not meditating on something. It's not visualizing. It's not repeating a mantra. It's simply being, present, conscious, without adding anything. You can experience it now. Stop for a second. Feel that you exist. Don't think about it. Just feel it. The pure sensation of I am here. No name, no history, no memory, just the awareness that you are. This is the I am. And Ramana said, this is all you have ever been. Everything else is secondary. But the ego hates that, because the I am needs nothing. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't need to conquer. It doesn't need to be validated. It simply is. And that frustrates the ego, which exists only to do, achieve, protect, defend. So the ego creates noise. It reminds you of tasks. It brings worries. It resurrects past pains. It invents future fears. Anything to pull you out of the silence. Because in silence, the ego has no function. And without a function, it dissolves. Nisargadatta said, silence is the absence of oneself. But not in the sense of annihilation, in the sense that the false self, the character, the mask, disappears. And what remains is the real self, Being, pure consciousness that was never born and will never die. But you're afraid to find that. Because if you're not your thoughts, your emotions, your story, who are you? And if there's no one, do you still exist? And Ramana responds with the greatest revelation of all. You are nobody. And precisely for that reason, you are everything. Here is the ultimate truth that Ramana lived until his death. Silence is not the end of life. It is the beginning of true life. Because everything you believed yourself to be, your traumas, your achievements, your fears, your dreams, are merely movements on the surface, like waves in the ocean. They come, they go. But the ocean remains, still, silent, eternal. You are the ocean, not the waves. And when you rest in the I am, when you stop identifying with the movement and acknowledge the depth, you realize something extraordinary. Nothing that happened to you truly touched you. Because the real you was never hurt, never rejected, never abandoned. It simply observed all of this happening on the surface while remaining untouched. This doesn't mean denying the pain. It means realizing that the pain happened to the character, to the identity, to the ego, but not to the being. The being never suffered. It only witnessed the suffering. And when you realize this, not as a concept, but as a direct experience in silence, you are free. Not because life has changed, but because you have stopped confusing yourself with what happens in life. Ramana, in his final moments before dying, when asked where he was going, said, "Where would I go? I am." He was not in the body. He was the consciousness that inhabited the body. And when the body was gone, the consciousness remained, because it was never limited by form. You don't need to wait for death to discover this. You can discover it now, in silence, in the I am, in the recognition that you are not the noise of life. You are the silent presence where the noise happens. So today, right now, try this. Stop everything. Close your eyes. Feel that you exist. Don't think I exist. Just feel the pure consciousness of being, nameless, formless, historyless, and rest there, in I am, without seeking, without doing, without adding, just being. And if thoughts arise, and they will, don't fight them. Just acknowledge, this is a thought, and I am the one who observes the thought. And return to I am, to the pure sensation of existing. Ramana lived his entire life in this state, not as an escape from the world, but as the only true way to be in the world. He didn't deny the pain. He simply didn't become confused by it. He didn't reject the thoughts. He simply didn't believe that they were what he thought. And in the end, what he discovered wasn't a lesson. It was a reminder. The reminder that you were always silence, always presence, always the I am. You simply forgot because you were too busy being something else. Take a deep breath. Go back home, to the silence, to being, to what you always were, before you learned to pretend.